Howdy, and welcome to Wise About Texas, the Texas History Podcast. This is your host, Ken Wise. Thank you very much for tuning in today for a little bit of Texas history. This podcast being recorded and released in October of 2025, and it's finally getting a little cool in the morning, so hopefully this weather's going to break and Texas will cool off a little bit. Texas is in a period of incredible growth. It's the best place to do business in the country. And of course, the spirit of Texas makes it a great place to live, as all of you listening know. But growth in Texas is not a new phenomenon. People have always wanted to move here for various reasons. Sometimes it's to seek the prosperity that Texas has offered through the years. Sometimes it's to live in a place that values individual freedom. But sometimes it's to escape from somewhere else. And this is the story of just such an individual who moved here from England in the late 19th century. The difference is, this man was royalty. So let's go back to 1883 and get wise about Texas. Our subject today is Joseph Heneage Finch. He was an Englishman born in Middlesex, England, to Heneage Finch and Jane Finch in 1849. His father, Heneage, was the 6th Earl of Aylesford, and that makes Joseph the 7th Earl of Aylesford. Aylesford is located in southeast England. It's in the region of Kent, England. It's a very old village, been around since medieval times. It was once the center of the manufacturing of newsprint in England. So that was Joseph's hometown. He married in 1871 and married a lady named Edith Williams, and they had 2 daughters. He was friends with Albert, Prince of Wales, later became King Edward VII. Joseph lived on an estate outside London called Packington Hall, and Joseph became a member of King Edward VII's inner circle. They were a party group, to say the least. Finch went with then Prince Edward. I referred to him as Prince Albert earlier. His name is Albert Edward. His father was Prince Albert. His mother was Queen Victoria, so sorry for the confusion. We'll call him King Edward just for convenience. So he took Joseph and others on a tour of India in 1875, 1876. That was a 17-week event. And Joseph was a big hunter, so he was kind of in charge of the hunting and the sporting activities on the Goodwill tour of India, including, and somewhere I read that they hunted tigers from the backs of elephants. So that's pretty exciting as deer season approaches. Going to be tough to duplicate on your deer lease, however. But it was on this Goodwill tour that Joseph discovered he had a problem. And the problem involved his wife's conduct while he was gone. It seems that Edith began an affair with a member of the Churchill family, a famous name. The story goes that footprints in the snow led to her bedroom window, which was difficult to deny the situation. So Joseph comes running home. There were scandalous letters allegedly involving the Prince of Wales, Edward, with whom Joseph was on the trip, and that there were mutual threats to expose unsavory conduct up and down the chain. Well, when you get that situation in a royal family, you have a real problem. And so, and actually this scandal fractured the relationship between the Churchills and the royal family, which was later acknowledged by a descendant of the Churchills I'm talking about, Winston Churchill. Lady Aylesford, Edith, her reputation was destroyed, as it probably should have been, by this situation. And Joseph came home quickly to England to try to handle the fallout. Well, the Lord and Lady of Aylesford, Joseph and Edith, got a divorce. The problem was that the divorce suit was a very public revelation of all of the scandalous facts. So that was a very difficult situation for Joseph, because even though he was an earl, he had exposed the royal family, royal adjacent, the high society of England, et cetera, and so Joseph actually ended up out of favor, because people probably just didn't want to acknowledge that they were associated with him. So this kind of was a setback for Joseph. He was no longer welcome in the social circles that he was familiar with. So Joseph needed to leave town. In fact, he left the country. He headed to New York, where he met Jay Gould. Jay Gould was a railroad magnate. Gould actually had grown up in poverty, and he was kind of an entrepreneur, and he invested in several businesses, got educated as a bookkeeper, was involved in a tannery at one point, and began investing in railroads in the 1850s and 60s. One of his investors, as a matter of fact, was Cornelius Vanderbilt. He also was fairly politically savvy, because he got involved with Tammany Hall, which was the contingent that ran New York City, the political bosses, and he made Boss Tweed, kind of the head of all of that, a director of one of his railroads. And of course, in turn, legislation favorable to that railroad was passed. Well, one of the railroads that Gould was involved in was called the Texas and Pacific. And he was trying to build the railroad west. And when he met Joseph, of course, was interested in hunting. So he needed to find a place to live. And he mentioned to Gould that there was good hunting in Texas, or so he had heard. Gould said, "Oh, yes, and get on my railroad and head out there." Well, the end of the line for that railroad in Texas was Colorado City. So he goes to Colorado City, which in the late 1800s was a pretty wild place. And he hooked up with a former Texas Ranger named Birdwell, John Birdwell, and got the lay of the land, decided to buy a ranch in Big Spring. Now, I need to explain that Joseph was what they called at the time a remittance man. And what that meant was, and it occurred so frequently that they had a term for it. We would call it a trust fund baby now. All his expenses and maintenance were being paid by his family in England, but he was not allowed to live there. So, sort of, in other words, they sent the boy out of town, but they took care of him financially. So, and that was not an infrequent occurrence during this time period. So here comes Joseph. It's said that he lands in Texas with a bunch of horses, dogs, his English saddle, his English clothing, and of course, he brought his servants. One source has Joseph's remittance at $50,000 a year. Now, $50,000 a year in 1883 would probably be, I'm guessing, well over $1 million. I don't know. I didn't calculate it, but he was doing just fine, and he was not afraid to pay a bar tab. So the people of then rural Big Spring, Texas, would put up with a lot as long as this Englishman would take care of the tab. One source said that they would not call him Earl, would not call him Your Grace or Your Highness or whatever they're supposed to call him. They would settle for Judge. That was the only title that would give him. It's sort of funny because that was just kind of a general catch-all title in those days for somebody with respect. In the eastern part of the United States, it might be Colonel. But that was all Joseph was going to get. All right, so we have the Earl in Texas, but I want to go back a little bit and sort of shape the picture of the man who arrived in Texas by talking a little bit about what I was able to find about his life in England. And this took some work in the archives of British newspapers. And there was a particular article that was pretty interesting that was very descriptive. It's written so beautifully, as British writing sometimes is, and very understated. So I want to talk a little bit about this article, and it'll give you a little bit of a picture of the Earl of Aylesford. And you're going to pick up on the tone of this article, was written shortly after his death. But the article talks about the Earl's short career, and during his short career, quote, his affairs have several times been prominently before the public, close quote. Not something that you want if you're in British society. It talks about his marriage. It talks about the scandal with Lord Blandford, who became the Duke of Marlborough, by the way. There were suits and countersuits during the divorce. There was an alleged illegitimate child. But the end of the story is, and this is just classic, quote, Lord Aylesford became financially embarrassed and a private act was passed for the settlement of his affairs, close quote. In other words, what I described earlier as the remittance man, that's when everyone just took pity on Lord Aylesford, and the actual Parliament of England passed an act to take care of him so that he would have some money. He was described as strange and romantic in the extreme. He was also described as impulsive and headstrong, yet generous to a fault. The author of this particular article said, now and again he threw about money as though it were mere trash. But at the same time, he was apparently an incredible athlete, and he's described that there were few in the Midlands of England, quote, who could beat him at running, leaping, or boxing. So that's pretty good. If you can work on your running, leaping, and boxing, you're in good shape. He apparently threw a party at his estate, the Packington estate, and rumor has it that what were described as a gang of Birmingham thieves were coming, no offense to anyone from Birmingham, that's just how they described it in this article, were coming to rob this party. And so Lord Aylesford took the lead and soon, quote, soon had a heap of the intending thieves lying at his feet, close quote. No doubt an overstatement, but apparently he was not afraid of a fight. There was also an incident where he entertained the Queen and the Prince of Wales and made a big show about it, even though they didn't want a big show made. And that ended up in taking the press prisoner and holding him in Packington Hall at the direction of the Queen to try to prevent a lot of coverage of what was going on. And apparently that put him on the outs with the Queen. Nevertheless, this generous author states, quote, the faults of Lord Aylesford were of the head and not of the heart, which is a fairly generous statement. Lord Aylesford was also a very significant force in horse racing in England and had multiple champions in various races, which is too detailed to go into in this episode. Going back a little further in time, I found an article that described, now this is before all of the royal visits, etc., found a little blurb in a very obscure 1874 newspaper, and it said that Lord Aylesford had made an apology for, I'm reading now, quote, had made an apology for the indiscretion he had committed at the Leamington railway station and had paid a sum of money to the railway officials with whom he had come in collision. But a Mr. Hardy, whoever that is, did not think it necessary to take any further steps on account of Lord Aylesford having made an apology. So one is left to wonder whether there was a late train, some luggage mishandled, etc., but Lord Aylesford's temper apparently got the best of him. So you get the picture that Lord Aylesford had an eventful life. He was a little loose with the funds that were entrusted to him, he liked to take a sip of whiskey every now and then, and ended up making some apologies down the line. So finally, he makes that fateful trip to Texas, having been essentially, let's face it, run out of England. One of the features of his time in Texas, he loved mutton or lamb or sheep, and had his own personal butcher in his entourage, which sort of disgusted the Texans, of course, who were all fans of beef, but they put up with a lot since, as I mentioned, the Lord of Aylesford was paying the bar tab. He bought a hotel when he came to Texas, sometimes confused with Conrad Hilton's purchase of the hotel in Cisco. It was a different hotel. He bought one called the Cosmopolitan. The details of that transaction are a little murky. People that went into his house described his house as having piles of whiskey bottles, quote, as big as haystacks, close quote. So I think that puts to rest the question of whether the Earl liked a little nip every now and then. One New York reporter described the Lord Aylesford as, quote, a surprising consumer of whiskey and brandy, and when he began to drink, he lost all regard for money, close quote. A classic tale if there ever was one. So Lord Aylesford lived the life of a Texas ranchman, at least as he defined it, in Big Spring, until January 13th, 1885. He was playing cards in the Cosmopolitan Hotel that he owned, and he excused himself from the table, allegedly, by saying, quote, goodbye, boys, close quote. He went in, got into bed, pulled up the blanket, and died. The Earl's body was sent back to England and before it was sent back, the undertaker removed the internal organs before the body was shipped, and maybe the last quote about the Lord of Aylesford, he described his liver as being not unlike a rock, close quote. When the Earl died, he was only 36 years old. Now, the coda to this story is that the Earl's will was probated in Howard County. And if you go to the Howard County Courthouse, you can see the will of an English nobleman, not a usual occurrence in rural Texas. I want to particularly thank my good friend Knox Nunley, Houston lawyer, Marine Corps officer, for inspiring me to do this episode. He was recently in the Howard County Courthouse, and we ran into each other at breakfast, and he was talking about the fascinating will of an English nobleman that was there in the Howard County Courthouse. So thank you, Knox, for mentioning that. If you have a story idea, please send it to me at host@wiseabouttexas. And as far as getting there to some of the places we talked about, if you on I-20 between Sweetwater and Midland, stop in Big Spring, see the Settles Hotel, which will be another episode of Wise About Texas coming up. And it's one of the old, great classic hotels that's been restored. And you can walk the streets that Lord Aylesford walked. If you're really ambitious, Lord Aylesford is buried at St. James's Church, which was built in the 1700s. It's on the grounds of Packington Hall in Warwickshire, England. And that's where the Earl's body was laid to rest. It's kind of the family chapel there. So if you're in England, go check it out. Well, that wraps it up for this episode of Wise About Texas. Thanks for listening today. If you want to support the preservation and promotion of Texas history, go to patreon.com/wiseabouttexas. Find us on Instagram @wiseabouttexas. Thanks again for listening. Go out and do something for Texas today. And until next time, God bless Texas, and we'll see you down the road.